Hey, how you doing?
Midlife crisis, according to Erickson's psychosocial development model, says that people during the middle ages of 35 to 65 enter a state where they're at two conflicting states of being. The first state is called generativity. That's when a person looks back at their past life and sees that they've either generated and produced and created enough of a legacy to be satisfied with their life, or they enter a different state of being.
And this second stage of being is stagnation, which is also known as stagnant or being complacent. This is when someone looks back on their life and they realize that they haven't accomplished as much as they wanted to, or feel like they've just kind of coasted through life. When individuals feel stagnant or feel like they've been in the stage of stagnation, then they usually experience a midlife crisis.
All right, so Matt, when you think of midlife crisis, what comes to mind?
Probably around 40 or 50 years old. Person probably ends up having some sort of uh, crisis where he's having a conflict with his own identity. He feels like he should be primarily in a better situation than he is currently, and
Okay. All right, so when you think of midlife crisis, what comes to mind?
Depression, hopelessness. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Now, when you think of midlife crisis, do you tend to associate it with one gender over the other?
Yeah, a man.
A man.
And a red car.
And
Red
car.
convertible.
Very good. All right, so when you think of midlife crisis, what comes to mind?
Like angst and just depression and like feeling like you haven't accomplished much in life. And I associate it with men mostly. Yeah, so.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First question. When you think of midlife crisis, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Change, big change, an unsettled feeling, uncomfortable looking at your life.
Perfect. And the second, when you think of midlife crisis, do you tend to associate it with a certain gender?
I do. I tend to associate that more with men. It seems like the guys are the ones getting the convertibles and the hair plugs, whereas with women, it seems like it's more like the change of life, menopause.
So when you think of midlife crisis, do you tend to associate it with a certain gender?
Yes, I tend to associate midlife crisis with men.
Okay, and the second question, when you think of midlife crisis, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
First thing that comes to mind is guys that become dissatisfied with their current situation and they start, getting convertibles and younger girlfriends and.
Okay, so first question, when you think of midlife crisis, what comes to mind?
Being stagnant, not going anywhere, being in the same rut day after day after day.
Perfect. Okay, and the second question is, when you think of midlife crisis, do you tend to associate it with a specific gender?
Male.
From the interviews we took, it was very evident that people were split whether midlife crisis was associated with man or woman. But from the research that we've gathered, midlife crises are more likely to be common among men, and this is because when women go through the stage of acting out or changing lifestyles between the ages of 35 and 65, it's usually associated with menopause. Whereas for men, when they go through the same behavior styles or lifestyle changes, it's associated with midlife crisis.
Researchers have been able to find correlations between early development issues and the symptomology of midlife crisis. In one such study, Braverman and Paris were able to find a link between early parental neglect or emotional attachment issues and midlife crisis issues later on. The researchers did make the distinction that children of psychotic parentage did not correlate the same as children of parents with depression. The research only used male participants but suggested that attachment issues eventually led them to experience interpersonal relationship issues. Since men are more likely to emotionally invest in work life and career oriented achievement, their midlife crisis tends to affect these areas. Research has suggested that a strong therapeutic relationship and a very controlled therapy are the best fixes for the issue of midlife crisis.